I always like to start and just see how many people own Bitcoin. Okay, this is way more than the New York meetup. And then what about Ethereum? Some altcoins out there? People, anybody own any DAG? Okay, maybe not, but maybe after today. So I'm Ben Jorgensen. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Constellation Labs, and I want to kind of first set the stage. Back in January, we raised about $30 million in ETH, and that happened in about 3 weeks. Pretty amazing 3 weeks. I've never experienced anything like it. And we created about a token supply of about 4 billion tokens that we sold about 24% to our investors, which were based all across the world. Our company is about 30 people. We have about 20 admins on top of that manage all of our Telegram community chatter, which we've got about 30,000 people on Telegram, 300,000 people reach. And really kind of what we're building is an open source technology. So we have 4 co-founders that range from, our CTO really wrote out a lot of the architecture and the math that that we're known for. And so that's a little bit of our team dynamic. So I always like to, I heard on the last panel that up here, they were kind of differentiating between cryptocurrency and blockchain. And I always like to make that difference is that they're also people use it as a synonym for one another, but really they're 2 separate things. And having gone through a 7-month process of, creating a token, raising money on a pre-sale, and then getting it listed on an exchange, I definitely like to distinguish the 2. And so we're kind of this third aspect, which is called a DAG, or directed acyclic graph, that reimagines the blockchain, not as a chain, but actually as a graph that allows for actually topological sequencing, which I heard the last gentleman talking about in terms of AI. And so this kind of architecture is really created or used today in big data and machine learning initiatives. So what is Constellation? So Constellation is building an enterprise and consumer-grade distributed ledger technology that will allow easy transactions between machines and devices. And so what we really saw as a team, we kind of came together and said, okay, well, these distributed networks are really working. It's really interesting, but for enterprise and consumer applications to be built on this new technology, we have to reimagine the architecture and framework. And so what we relate this to is that, in one example, existing blockchain is like waiting in one giant line for one door to open on a train. But a DAG architecture really kind of opens up every door on the train for people to get in. So what's quicker, what's more efficient? So why does all this matter? You hear a lot of blockchain technologies, and we're a protocol, so we're building an infrastructure layer. We're building our own blockchain, if you like. But why does all this matter when everybody's talking about high transaction, high throughput? I kind of go back to this book that I read in 2012 called Abundance by Peter Diamandis. And if you know this group, they're based out of NASA Ames, called Singularity. I think it's Singularity Network. And what he talks about are really these new technologies that are starting to arise to create new abundance. And these new technologies that are rising are AI, they're blockchain technology, and we see this coming off of the precursor of enabling this digital revolution that happened with social media platforms that allowed the ease and ability of knowledge and information to be exchanged very cheaply. And furthermore, he kind of came up with these kind of 6 Ds of digital disruption. And basically, digitalization enabled exponential growth. But that exponential growth had a very deceptive growth because it didn't happen linearly like that. It kind of started out slow, and then it exponentially grew up. And then we saw this like dematerialize. So taking what is expensive and bulky and actually putting that into one thing. We think of our phone as a video, a camera, all these things that cost hundreds of dollars a piece. And then democratization happened with this digital revolution. And the last thing, which I like to point out too, because we're at a fintech meetup, is the demonetization. And so what is the demonetization? I think it's kind of a confusing aspect, But if you look at what Airbnb has done to taking somebody's loan and mortgage and saying, hey, you can rent out your house on a short-term lease and make it into a hotel, you kind of release new funds in a new way, and you stop worrying about your mortgage. Or same thing with your car and becoming an Uber driver. We're figuring out how to demonetize things. But most specifically, solar energy. If you look at solar energy over the past few years, we've seen the demonetization of energy. Like, this is a fascinating time. And last year, for the first time, we saw that the price of solar energy was below any other form of energy out there. And so you think about this, and you think about like how the problem set shifts drastically. What happens to this world where we are shifting the entire problem set beyond having to worry about energy to power our buildings? What does that do to creativity and entrepreneurship? And so what we've seen as kind of the outcome is you see bureaucracy and governance come in the way of enabling this abundance of energy. Namely, utility companies not wanting people to have access or the ability to transact your solar power. But interestingly enough, this abundance is coming in the way that California gave free energy to Arizona. And yet, for some reason, we're still building power plants in Southern California. So we're seeing this digitalization having rapid effects on commodities. So what does this mean for financial institutions? Well, over the last several years, over the last decade or 2 decades, we've seen the digital revolution come up, and we've seen financial institutions attempt to get involved in a meaningful way. But really what happened in the digital revolution, this digitalization, are companies learned how to monetize the application layer. They really figured out how to create a new level or ecosystem of transactions. So when you look at Amazon, it makes sense that they go after different verticals because it's about applying digitalization to traditional industries and creating a new monetization structure. So we've really kind of nailed home the value on the application layer, and what you see starting to arise are blockchain technologies, which uses gamification mechanisms to monetize the protocol layer that the application layer was built on. So what I mean by that is that if you get involved in blockchain companies and they have rewards or mining networks, you're actually getting paid to contribute to a network. And this was something that was missed at the early days of the open source of TCP/IP. And what you had were the application layer coming in and saying, okay, we can use this internet TCP/IP and we can monetize on it. And so we're seeing a reverse happen, and that's where all this like magic and allure comes from the protocol layer. So, but the thing with financial institutions, I think we over accentuated, or consultants like Accenture and Deloitte over articulated or overemphasized the need to get involved in this technology at a very early stage. So if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, and all of you that are following the cryptocurrency phase, this will all make sense, is that over the past year and a half, enterprise organizations and financial institutions were overly wowed by the capabilities. We are still at a day where we're figuring out the very infrastructure, the very bottom layer. And so what you see back in like January, where people were in a craze of getting into the crypto space, and it was at the top of the market, an $800 billion market was created overnight. And now today we're at a $200 billion market, because a lot of these enterprise groups were kind of overly wowed and demystified on what was really available. But nobody promised these things beyond kind of consulting groups. And so the financial institutions actually nailed a few really good use cases on how blockchain can really solve some problem, such as settlement, intermittences, payments. And so all these kind of spot treatments were actually tested today. So I like to avoid actually talking about various use cases when it comes to financial institutions, because a lot of it's been tested. And I've met with a ton of these organizations, all the way to the Monetary Authority of Singapore, to learn about what they'd done today and where it kind of benefited them. And they were demystified. They weren't excited by what they saw. It worked, but it really came down to what was the benefit analysis of us switching a significant part of our tech stack onto their tech stack. And JP Morgan did an amazing analysis of the industry about 4 months ago. So I pulled some of these images from it. So while there were significant benefits to it, we didn't see the benefit analysis conclude that there was a huge economic incentive to switch a significant part of their tech stack onto blockchain technology. So we're still in this point of how do we really engage with financial institutions in a meaningful, impactful way. And so when we look at some of the technologies, we're actually seeing that it's the best crypto or blockchain technology, XRP, Ripple, also based in San Francisco, is really providing some value in the way that they're doing settlement. Their technology is focused on settlements, where you see that it typically takes a bank 3 to 5 days to run a settlement between countries, and they're finding ways to do it around 4 seconds by leveraging distributed networks. So where we come in today is when we think of financial institutions and their impact and what we need to do to make an impact to financial institutions is we need to rethink blockchain technology, because 4 seconds isn't fast enough to run a Visa transaction, which they run 24,000 transactions in a second. We're not there. So we have to rethink a new architecture. We need to rethink how globally distributed networks work. Bitcoin is primarily mined in China, where 80% of the mines are there. And we need to rethink heightened security, which will ultimately leverage scalability by working with new consensus models or miner networks. And so really the opportunity here is not for the blockchain of X, but for financial institutions to rethink transactions and open up sustainable development initiatives around the infrastructure. And number 9 on the global sustainable development goals by the World Economic Forum is all around building out new infrastructure and being more innovative. And this is the impact that I think that financial institutions really can start to do, is less about the blockchain for X and these tested sandbox environments, and more grandiose about enabling connected communities. So we have a big initiative internally at Constellation that's about enabling communities to transact. So Farm from a Box is a company that deploys these giant shipping containers that allows a community in sub-Saharan Africa to create a 5-acre farm that's all IoT enabled. So how do you take all that data and transact between communities? Constellation's technology creates a reward-based system that allows people to seamlessly transact between machine devices and in a peer-to-peer capacity by exchanging currencies. And so really, my kind of conclusion of everything, and I blazed through this presentation because I had 20 minutes to do it a couple weeks ago, but is really that we're redefining what it means to transact, and we're redefining what it means to make a community transact, and that it's not just a simple Venmo application of peer-to-peer transaction, but it's understanding where solar energy comes in. How do we tokenize that? How do we exchange that with another network? And how do we exchange that into a community? And then how does that power our car? And it's a very futuristic outlook, but that's where a lot of the excitement with these emerging blockchain technologies come into play. So what we are doing is really focusing on creating an infrastructure that will enable all these devices to communicate and transact in an independent, serverless way. So thank you.